The man stepped out of the truck with grease still under his nails. He wore a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit. The collar curled up like it had forgotten how to lie flat. Snowflakes drifted down gently, softening the edges of the cracked pavement outside Wilson's Auto Repair. It was the same place he had walked away from 12 years ago, the same place he had come back to now with less hair, less pride, and more to lose. Lucas Boyd didn't believe in signs, but he noticed it anyway. There on the wooden bench just outside the glass door was a girl, no coat. Just a hoodie 2 sizes too big and a pair of worn sneakers that looked too thin for this weather. She sat perfectly still, like someone told her to freeze and she took it literally. Lucas paused. The door handle was in his hand, but his eyes were on the kid. She was maybe 8, maybe 9. Her hair was tucked into a wool cap with a pom-pom missing. On her head sat a pair of oversized yellow headphones not plugged into anything. She wasn't listening to music. She was listening to the world not notice her. Lucas turned the handle. The bell above the door jingled, but he didn't step in. Instead, he looked at the girl again. She looked right back, with eyes older than her face. "You waiting for someone?" he asked, voice rough like gravel in cold air. She shrugged, then answered quietly like she'd practiced this line before. "My mom has an interview, but she's in the hospital right now, so I'm here instead." Lucas blinked. "What?" The girl pointed toward the shop door without turning her head. "That's the place, right? Wilson's Auto? 9:30 appointment. She really needed this job." Lucas looked at the wall clock inside. 9:33. "You came in her place?" "No one else could," she said. "I thought maybe if I sat here, someone would notice." He let out half a breath, not a laugh, not disbelief, just a breath that meant he had no words. "You know it's freezing out here, right?" She nodded. "Better than the hospital waiting room." The wind picked up. She tucked her hands deeper into her sleeves. Lucas took a step toward the door again. This time he opened it. Warm air rushed out. Fluorescent light spilled onto the sidewalk. But he didn't go in. He looked back one more time. She wasn't asking for anything. That's what made it harder to ignore. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded resume. His own. The one he'd rewritten 5 times last night. He stared at it, then looked at the bench. The girl was watching the snow fall like it was a language only she could read. Something in him shifted just slightly. He walked over, slowly. "You got a name?" "Avery." "I'm Lucas." She nodded, polite but distant. He held out the folded paper. She didn't take it. "It's for a job," he said, trying to smile. "Think I still got a shot?" Avery looked him over, not judging, just measuring. "You smell like real grease," she said. "That helps." He chuckled. First real sound he'd made since getting out of bed. Then, without saying anything else, he turned and stepped into the shop. The bell jingled again behind him. The warmth hit his back like a second chance. Inside, people talked numbers and timelines. Oil cans clinked, someone sneezed, life went on. Lucas stood at the front desk but didn't hand over the resume. Outside on the bench, Avery pulled one side of her hoodie tighter, then stood up to stretch her legs. The headphones slipped off her head, fell onto the bench. She didn't notice. Lucas stepped out again 5 minutes later, resume still in hand. The girl was gone, but the headphones, still there. Yellow, worn, quiet. He picked them up, turned them over in his hands. They didn't play music, but somehow they said something anyway. Lucas stood there holding the yellow headphones like they might bite. They were light, too light, foam peeling on one side. A crack along the band held together with faded tape. The kind of thing someone repairs because they can't afford to replace it or because it matters more than it looks. He looked up and saw Avery returning from around the corner. She held a cup of water from the shop's break room and nothing else. Still no coat. Still no urgency. "You forgot these," Lucas said, holding out the headphones. Avery looked at them, then at him, then back at the bench. "They weren't forgotten," she replied. "I leave them when I want someone to wait." Lucas blinked. "That's a strange system." "It works sometimes," she said. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench. The wood was cold and the wind cut sharper here, but Avery didn't flinch. She just sipped from the water cup like it was tea in a porcelain mug. "You don't talk much, do you?" Lucas asked. She shrugged. "Most people don't listen long enough anyway." He nodded quietly. "I used to have a kid who talked like that," he said. "Said weird things. Made people uncomfortable at the grocery store." Avery didn't smile, but her eyebrows lifted like she almost did. "Where's he now?" Lucas paused. "With his mom, I think." "You don't know?" Lucas exhaled through his nose. "It's complicated." She nodded again, not judging, just taking it in like weather. A delivery truck roared past the street. Both of them winced slightly. Then quiet again. The kind of quiet that only exists on the edge of things, edge of town, edge of morning, edge of too late. Avery broke it. "My mom says if you stay quiet long enough, people tell you who they really are." Lucas tilted his head. "That why you're sitting out here, waiting for someone to tell you?" "No," she said plainly. "I already know who they are. I just like watching when they don't know I know." Lucas chuckled, not because it was funny, but because he wasn't sure what else to do. "You always talk like this?" "No, only when people ask questions they don't really want answers to." He leaned back, looking up at the sky. Gray clouds rolled low, like they were in a hurry to go nowhere. "You cold?" he asked. "Yes." "You want to come inside?" "No." "Why not?" "Because then it's real." Lucas turned to her. "What is?" She looked at the shop. Her eyes didn't blink. "The part where they say no." Lucas stared at her a long moment. Something about the way she said it, flat, quiet, sure made him want to sit there forever. Not because he had something to say, but because maybe he didn't need to. He glanced at the headphones in his lap again, then held them back out. "You want these back?" She shook her head. "You're holding them. That means you're staying." The bell above the door chimed as Lucas stepped inside. Warm air, stale with oil and old coffee, met him like an old colleague you didn't want to see. Nothing had changed. Not the front counter, not the flickering light above the appointment board, not even the same poster of brake pads half peeled in the corner. He walked to the desk. A younger guy in a Wilson's Auto sweatshirt glanced up. "You here for the 9:30? The guy asked, already pulling out a clipboard. Lucas nodded, then didn't move. "You okay?" the guy asked. Lucas opened his mouth, closed it. He held up the resume, stared at it. The paper had creased from where his fingers had clenched it too long. His name, typed in bold at the top, suddenly looked unfamiliar. "Yeah, I'm here for it," Lucas said. But his voice didn't match his face. The guy didn't notice. He was too busy handing over forms. "Fill this out and bring it to the back when you're done." Lucas took the clipboard, walked to the side table, sat down, pen in hand. But the pen didn't move. He stared at the first question. "What brings you to Wilson's Auto?" 12 years ago, it was ambition. Now he wasn't sure. Out the window, Avery was still on the bench. He watched her pick at the sleeve of her hoodie, glance up at the sky, then back at the sidewalk like she was waiting for a message to appear in the cracks. Lucas set the pen down. The door chimed again. He stepped outside. "That was fast," Avery said without looking up. Lucas shrugged. Didn't feel right. She gave a small nod like she expected that. "You gonna try somewhere else?" "Maybe." Silence again. Then she stood. "You can keep them," she said. "What?" "The headphones. I have another pair, they don't work either." Lucas looked down at the yellow set still in his hand. "They're not broken," he said. "They're just quiet." "Same thing?" She adjusted her hoodie as if that settled the matter. "You sure your mom's gonna be okay?" he asked. Avery's face twitched, just a flicker. "She's been through worse. This isn't the scary part." "What is?" "Going back to normal after." Lucas didn't answer. He just looked at the headphones again. They weren't clean. They weren't new. But they felt like something worth holding on to. Avery stepped off the curb. "Thanks for not being weird," she said over her shoulder, then walked down the block like she'd done it 100 times. Lucas watched her disappear around the corner. He looked back at the bench, the impression of her still there, then at the clipboard still in his hand. He folded the forms, shoved them in his coat pocket, took one last look at the shop, then at the sky. The snow had stopped, and so had the wind, but something inside him was still moving. He turned the headphones in his hand. The foam pad was loose. The left side crackled when touched. A single sticker peeled on the back, a smiley face half worn. He didn't know why he smiled, but he did. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel strange. The front door creaked like it needed permission to open. Lucas pushed it gently, then caught it before it slammed. The house was small, quiet in the way empty things are. A jacket hung crooked on the coat rack. The kitchen light flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere deeper inside, the sound of cartoon voices echoed faintly. He walked through the narrow hallway and found Max sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by a fortress of couch cushions and plastic dinosaurs. The 5-year-old looked up. "Did you get it?" he asked. Lucas forced a smile. "Not yet, buddy." Max didn't frown, didn't pout, just nodded and turned back to his plastic T-Rex. "You can try again tomorrow," he said. Lucas knelt beside him. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe tomorrow's the day." He ruffled Max's hair gently. The boy leaned into it without looking up. The room felt colder than it should have been. Lucas rose and moved toward the far wall, where an old wooden clock hung just above the window. It was square, dark-stained oak, and had belonged to his grandfather. The kind of clock that ticked loud enough to remind you of your heartbeat. He opened the glass panel and adjusted the hands. They ticked forward a second, then stopped again. Lucas tapped the side. Nothing. "You still trying to fix that?" Max asked from the floor. Lucas smiled without turning. "One day it'll work." "You always say that." "I always mean it." The boy considered that for a moment, then resumed his dinosaur war, complete with sound effects. Lucas sat on the edge of the couch. The clock ticked once, then fell silent again. He glanced around the room. On the side table, a toy car with a missing wheel, an empty coffee mug, and a folded piece of paper. The custody agreement untouched since the last meeting. He looked away. "Hey, Max," he said. "Yeah?" "You remember the lady who used to bring us those cookies at the hospital? The peanut butter ones?" Lucas nodded. "She might be someone we know." Max dropped a dinosaur. "Is she coming over?" "Not yet, just maybe someday." Max picked up the toy again, unfazed. Lucas leaned back and closed his eyes. The clock remained still, and yet something about the quiet tonight wasn't as heavy. Not better, just shifted. As if the air had been moved slightly by something unexpected. Maybe it was the girl on the bench. Maybe it was the way she looked at the world, as if silence told her more than words ever could. Lucas reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the yellow headphones, set them gently beside the clock, and for a long moment he just sat there, watching two things that didn't work anymore side by side. The room hummed, not loud, just steady. The kind of hum that fills up hospital rooms when the silence gets too big. Lucas sat in the plastic chair near the window, coat still on, hands in fists against his thighs. The world outside the glass was gray, not cloudy, not rainy, just absent of color. Inside, machines breathed for someone who couldn't, tubes tangled like roots under the thin blanket. The woman in the bed didn't move, except when the monitor beeped to prove she was still there. Lucas didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because anything he said now would sound too late. He closed his eyes, and the room changed. It wasn't this room anymore. It was a different hospital, a different bed, and his wife, then still his wife, was sitting upright, eyes wet and sharp, holding a baby wrapped in blue. "I waited," she whispered. "You said you'd be there." "I had to finish my shift," Lucas answered. "You know I couldn't just leave." She didn't yell. That was worse. She just nodded. "Right." He remembered the look on her face, not angry, just hollow. "You picked bolts and brakes over your son's first breath," she said. "You don't get that back, Lucas." He stood there, silent, holding nothing, not even an excuse. The baby cried. She turned away and hummed to soothe him. Lucas backed out of the room that day like a man stepping away from a wreck he caused but couldn't admit. Back in the present, the hum of the machines pulled him from the memory. He looked at the woman in the bed now, not his wife. Someone else. A stranger, yet the same stillness. The same faint beep. The same smell of antiseptic and overused hand sanitizer. He stood and walked toward the door, then paused. A folded piece of paper lay on the counter near the sink, slightly crumpled, edges soft like it had been held too many times. He glanced at the name, Marina Ellis. His eyes narrowed. The name scratched something in the back of his memory but didn't quite land. He didn't touch the paper, didn't need to. Instead, he sat back down. Not in the same chair, but a different one. Closer this time. The woman in the bed didn't know he was there, didn't need to. Some things aren't about being seen. They're about staying. Lucas took the yellow headphones from his coat pocket, held them in both hands, then set them gently on the bedside table. The knock was soft, like whoever made it wasn't in a hurry. Lucas wiped his hands on the dish towel and opened the door. There stood Franklin, same trucker cap, same gray jacket with the sleeves too long. In his hand, a small bundle wrapped in plastic. "You left this in the break room," Franklin said. Lucas squinted. It was an old rag, one he used to wipe his hands after cleaning a carburetor earlier that week. "You came all the way here for that?" Lucas asked. Franklin shrugged. "Didn't seem right to toss it." Lucas stepped aside. "You want to come in?" "Only for a minute." Franklin moved slowly, not because of age, though it was there, but because he never did anything fast. That was part of his power. Lucas motioned to the kitchen. Franklin stayed near the doorway. "You ever fix that clock?" he asked. Lucas followed his gaze. The wooden clock on the wall sat still, hands pointing at 6. 12. Like it had something to say, but didn't. "Nope," Lucas said. "Tried again this morning." Franklin nodded, then set the rag down on the side table like it was worth something. "You remember the guy used to run Wilson's back in the day, Eddie?" Lucas smiled faintly. "Sure, mean as a rusted wrench. He once told me something when I was younger and dumber. Said, there's two kinds of broken things, ones that need a tool and ones that need someone to care long enough not to give up." Lucas leaned against the counter. "Which one am I?" Franklin scratched his chin. "Didn't say you were broken. Just figured you might be wondering which kind that clock is." They stood in silence. The fridge hummed. Somewhere down the hall, Max giggled at something on the TV. Lucas glanced at the headphones still resting under the clock. "You think people can change, Franklin?" The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the table, picked up the rag, folded it once more, and set it closer to the sink. Then looked at Lucas with calm, tired eyes. "Son, I don't think people change because they're told to. I think they change when they see something worth staying for." He tipped his head slightly. "That little girl on the bench, she leave anything behind?" Lucas blinked. "The headphones." Franklin smiled. "Funny thing about quiet people, they often leave the loudest echoes." Lucas said nothing, just looked again at the yellow headphones, then at the clock, still not moving. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to move yet. The morning was colder than the last, not by much, but enough for Lucas to zip his jacket all the way up this time. He parked a block away from Wilson's auto, not because he had to, but because he wanted a minute before walking in. The shop looked the same, fluorescent lights already buzzing through the dusty glass. A guy in coveralls rolled a tire across the lot like he was chasing time. Lucas stepped through the door. The bell above gave the same dry jingle. Behind the front desk stood a different face today, a woman this time. Late 30s, sharp eyes, clipboard in hand. Name tag read, Heather, floor manager. She glanced up, professional and distant. "Can I help you?" Lucas cleared his throat. "I'm not here for the job. At least, not for me." Heather tilted her head. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sheet of paper creased, slightly smudged but legible. He laid it on the counter like a fragile offering. "It's a resume," he said. "Belongs to someone named Marina Ellis. She had an interview yesterday, but she couldn't make it. Medical emergency." Heather didn't touch the paper right away. She just looked at Lucas like she was waiting for the punchline. "You're dropping this off for her?" "Not exactly." He hesitated. "I met her daughter, Avery. She showed up anyway. Sat out on the bench for over an hour waiting for someone to come ask why she was there." Heather blinked, unsure whether to laugh or call security. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You're bringing someone else's resume, a stranger's, after they missed an interview, and you don't even know them." Lucas nodded. "That's about right." Heather leaned back slightly. "You realize how that sounds?" "I do." "Why?" Lucas looked down at the counter. There was a small nick in the laminate, barely noticeable unless you knew it was there. He ran his thumb across it. "Because I've been the guy who missed things before, important things, and I never got anyone to cover for me. Not even for 5 minutes." He met her eyes. "I can't fix that. But maybe I can show up for someone else's 5 minutes now." Heather looked at him a moment longer, then at the resume. She picked it up, scanned it quickly. "Auto admin, inventory systems, 2 years at a body shop in Deerfield." She paused. "Wait, Marina Ellis, I think I've seen her name before." Lucas didn't speak. Heather nodded to herself, then set the paper aside. "I can't promise anything. I'm not asking you to. But I'll read it, and I'll make sure someone else does too." Lucas nodded. That was more than he expected. He turned to go, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. Heather looked up. "If a kid named Avery ever shows up here again, don't ignore her." Heather cracked the faintest smile. "Kids like that? They don't come around twice." Lucas stepped outside. The cold bit his cheeks harder now, but it didn't sting. It reminded him he was still here. He didn't have a job, he didn't fix the clock, he didn't get his family back. But for the first time in years, he'd held a place for someone else. And that felt like a start. The first thing Marina felt was the dryness in her mouth, then the sting in her arm, then the too white light above her. It wasn't morning light, it was hospital light. Flat, cold, relentless. She blinked, but the ceiling stayed the same. Her head throbbed not with pain, but with confusion. She tried to sit up. The IV tugged her back down. A monitor beeped, too cheerful for the silence in the room. She looked to her right, an empty chair, a folded blanket, a plastic tray with half-melted ice chips. Then, Avery. The name slipped out before she could stop it. Not a cry, not a whisper. Just the first real word her brain could hold. Avery? Where's my daughter? No answer. She turned her head to the door, still no one. Her heart started to race, but the machine kept its own rhythm. Unbothered. Then the door opened. A nurse, mid-40s, kind eyes behind tired glasses, walked in holding a chart. "Ms. Ellis," she said gently. "Good, you're awake." "Where's my daughter?" Marina asked, struggling to sit. The nurse walked over and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "She's safe. One of the social workers sat with her yesterday. She's with a temporary guardian right now. Just until we could reach someone." Marina's eyes widened. "Guardian? She was alone?" The nurse nodded slowly. "She waited here until well past dark. Said she didn't want to miss your interview." Marina looked down. Her hands shook slightly. "I told her not to leave the apartment." "She said that too, right before she left." The nurse smiled, soft but not patronizing. "You raised a very determined kid." Marina exhaled, equal parts pride and guilt. Then the nurse reached into her pocket. "A man dropped this off last night, said it belonged to your daughter." She handed over a folded piece of paper. Inside, a pair of worn yellow headphones sat neatly wrapped in a clean cloth. Marina took the paper, unfolded it carefully. On it, one line written in block letters. "She waited for you, so I waited for her. LB." Marina stared at the words, no explanation, no phone number, just an initial. But the gesture landed heavy. "Do you know who brought this?" she asked. The nurse shook her head. "He didn't say much. Left right after. Looked like someone who doesn't stay long in any one place." Marina traced the headphones with her fingers. The foam was worn, the band bent, but they smelled faintly like her daughter. And something else, engine grease? She looked out the window, still snowing, still white. But somehow the light didn't feel as cold anymore. Lucas didn't park close to the entrance. He never liked walking into hospitals. Too many memories, too much silence in the wrong places. He sat in his truck with the engine off, holding the folded paper in one hand and the headphones in the other. The words he wrote had come out fast, unpolished, honest. That was the only way they'd make sense. "She waited for you, so I waited for her. LB." He thought about signing his full name, but somehow that felt like claiming something. This wasn't about being known. He stepped out of the truck, pulling up the collar of his jacket. The wind cut sharper today, carrying the weight of something unfinished. Inside, the lobby smelled like sanitizer and old coffee. A few people waited in plastic chairs, faces half covered by worry. Lucas approached the front desk, where a nurse looked up, already juggling 2 phones and a stack of forms. He didn't wait for her to ask. "I need to drop something off for a patient," he said. "Her name's Marina Ellis. She came in yesterday." The nurse raised an eyebrow. "You family?" He shook his head. "Just someone passing through." She held out a hand. He gave her the cloth-wrapped headphones and the note. "Will she know who it's from?" the nurse asked. "Doesn't have to." He turned to go. "Sir?" Lucas stopped. The nurse smiled, almost despite herself. "Most people don't leave anything but bills behind when they come here. You just gave her something better." Lucas nodded, then walked back into the cold. Upstairs, hours later, Marina sat propped up in bed. She was alone again, but not lonely. The room was dim now. Outside, snow painted a soft glaze over the window. She turned the folded paper in her hands, read it once more. The handwriting was uneven, firm, like someone wrote it without second-guessing. She traced her thumb across the initials, LB. The headphones sat in her lap, still warm from her hands. She adjusted the foam pad torn, but still holding on. These weren't just hers. They were Avery's routine, her comfort, her armor. Whoever had returned them had understood that. Her eyes didn't tear up. They didn't need to. Instead, something in her posture changed. Just a degree, she sat straighter, shoulders back. Outside the door, a nurse passed by and peeked in. "You doing all right, Ms. Ellis?" Marina nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "Better than yesterday." The garage smelled like brake dust and morning coffee. Lucas stood beneath the half-lit overheads, wiping oil from his fingers with a rag that used to be a t-shirt. He wasn't officially hired, but Franklin had waved him in one morning and tossed him a set of gloves without asking any questions. "Floor's short-handed," the old man said. "You got 2 hands, that'll do." So Lucas came in most days now, not for a paycheck, not yet, just to keep busy, just to keep from slipping backward. The work wasn't hard. Rotate a tire, check a leak, replace a dead battery, every job a little different, but every motion exactly the same. Wrench, turn, wipe, bolt, check, tighten. He liked it better that way. No room for thinking when your hands are full. But every so often, usually around mid-morning, he'd pause, wipe the sweat from his brow, then glance toward the front, through the office window, past the door just outside the bench. It was still there, unchanged. Worn wood, one cracked leg, a faint sticker of a cartoon sun peeling from the side. Avery had sat there just days ago, still as stone, eyes too big for her face, headphones slipping sideways. Now the bench was empty, but somehow it still looked occupied. Lucas would stare at it for a second too long. Then someone would call his name. "Boyd, you done with that Ford?" And he'd return to work, hands moving again. But that bench, it stayed with him. By noon, Heather had come in. Clipboard tucked under one arm, she nodded at Lucas as she passed. "You're early." He shrugged. "Didn't sleep much. You punch in yet?" He raised an eyebrow. "Am I on the books now?" Heather half smiled. "Let's just say we stopped asking questions." She walked into the office. Lucas turned back to the Chevy he was working on, leaned under the hood. The engine ticked as it cooled. His fingers found the clamp, twisted, slid it free. Then, tap. A single drop of something hit his shoulder. He looked up. A loose valve above the workbench. Condensation. Nothing major. Still, it reminded him. Drip. Another sound. From far off. Not water this time. It was a small scuff rubber sole on sidewalk. He looked up, toward the front window. But the bench was empty. Just the wind, probably. Still, he wiped his hands and stepped outside for a break. The cold hit immediately. Crisp. Clean, thin like paper. He stood there, hands in jacket pockets, watching snow melt into slush along the curb. No one around, but the air felt expectant. He sat on the bench, just for a second, just to see. The wood creaked beneath his weight. From here, the world looked quieter. The garage hum became background. The town moved slower. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, looked beside him. Empty space. But he could almost imagine her sitting there, still, small, brave. He pulled the yellow headphones from his jacket, set them beside him on the bench, not to give away, not to forget, just to remember. He sat there a while longer, not thinking, just hearing the silence, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound empty. Lucas was tightening the last lug nut on a Corolla when he saw the shadow. Small, still, waiting. He looked up from the wheel well. There she was, Avery, same hoodie, same scuffed sneakers, same eyes that looked like they belonged to someone who'd already lived a few lives. She stood just outside the garage bay, one hand behind her back, the other holding nothing. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it onto the workbench, and walked toward her slowly. "You came back," he said. Avery nodded. "Didn't know if you worked Mondays," she replied. Lucas half smiled. "Didn't know I did either." She stepped forward and held something out, a folded sheet of paper, thick, like the kind used for school art projects, crinkled around the edges, a little dirt on the corner. He took it carefully, unfolding it like it might tear with too much force. The drawing was simple. A bench. 2 people sitting on it, one big, one small, both with headphones over their heads. Lucas stared. No title, no signature, just that, a moment that happened, caught in crayon. "I didn't know what to say," Avery said, "so I drew it instead." Lucas looked down at her. "Did you draw this from memory?" "No, I drew it because I wanted to keep it. But then I thought, maybe it belongs to both of us." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. She didn't wait for him to try again. Instead, she sat on the real bench, the one outside the garage, same spot as before. Lucas folded the drawing back up, gently, then sat beside her. Neither spoke. Cars passed. The garage hissed and clanged behind them, but where they sat, there was only wind, only stillness, and the faint sound of a town going about its day without noticing 2 people trying very hard to stay in one place. Avery pulled her hoodie tighter. Lucas leaned back, the paper still in hand. "You okay?" he asked, not looking at her. "I think so," she said. "You?" Lucas considered the question longer than expected. "I think I'm starting to be." Avery nodded. "That's enough for now." Silence again. But it wasn't heavy this time. It felt earned. Lucas looked at the drawing one more time, then folded it again and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Close to his chest, right next to the rag Franklin had returned days earlier. Avery leaned her head back and stared at the clouds. "You know," she said, "my mom paints, but only at night, when no one's watching." Lucas turned slightly. "Why at night?" "Because she's afraid if someone sees her care about something, they'll find a way to take it." Lucas looked down at the floor beneath the bench, then up at the sky with her. "I used to be like that too," he said. "Still am sometimes." Avery didn't reply. She didn't have to. Some answers are just the quiet agreement of 2 people sitting silently. The house greeted Lucas the way it always did. Quiet, a little too still for comfort. He closed the door behind him, kicked off his boots, and slipped the folded drawing from his jacket. In the living room, Max was asleep on the couch, one arm hugging a stuffed raccoon, the TV still buzzing with low-volume reruns. Lucas moved carefully. On the wall, just beneath the wooden clock that hadn't ticked in years, he pinned the drawing. The tape barely held. The 2 figures on the bench, drawn in childlike lines, sat just below the motionless hands of time. A frozen moment beneath a frozen clock. He stared at it for a while, then sat down across the room, hands resting on his knees. The quiet didn't press down the way it used to. It just was. After a moment, Lucas stood and walked to the old desk near the hallway, the one with the drawer that always stuck. He tugged it open inch by inch. Inside, chaos. Bills from 2 addresses ago, crayons missing their wrappers, a broken keychain from a gas station somewhere in Idaho. He sifted through slowly, hands steady. Halfway down the stack, he paused. A cream-colored envelope, soft with age. No stamp, no fold, just a name in blue ink on the front, all caps handwriting. To Rebecca Boyd. From M. Ellis. Lucas stared at it. His fingers trembled as he slid the paper out. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. To whom it may concern, Rebecca is not just a capable community worker. She's the kind of person who remembers birthdays without reminders and brings soup before anyone says they're sick. I trust her with my kid. That's the highest compliment I know how to give. Marina Ellis. Lucas sat back slowly. The room didn't spin, but it tilted slightly. He had read those words before, years ago. When Rebecca brought the letter home after her part-time offer turned into something steadier. He didn't think about the name then, didn't connect it. But now he could see it clearly. Marina, Avery's mother, the woman lying in the hospital room just days ago. The same person who once trusted Rebecca with her own child. And now, his son had been cared for by someone Marina trusted in return. He folded the letter back gently, then carefully slid it into a clean envelope. Not because he had to, but because it felt wrong not to. Some things, he realized, circle back in their own time, even when the clock itself never moves. Lucas was wiping down the old wooden bench with a damp rag when he heard the footsteps. 2 sets, one small, skipping slightly, one slow, measured, careful. He looked up, Avery in her same weather-worn hoodie, and beside her, Marina. Thinner than he remembered, paler, her left hand still wrapped in gauze but standing. She gave a slight smile. "Hope this isn't weird," she said. Lucas set the rag down. "Only a little." Marina laughed just enough to prove she still could. They stood there for a moment. The wind toyed with Avery's sleeves. The smell of grease and cold metal hung in the air. "You fixed the bench," Marina said. Lucas nodded. "It wobbled. It wobbled back then, too." Avery climbed onto the bench like it was hers by right. Lucas looked at Marina again. "You're better?" She nodded. "I will be. They said I got lucky, but I think someone else got luckier." He said nothing, just waited. Marina looked down, brushed a loose thread from her jacket. "You know," she began, "this isn't the first time our lives crossed." Lucas raised an eyebrow. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded, paper-worn but still clean. "The letter," she said. "I wrote it for your wife years ago." Lucas's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes softened. "You wrote that?" "I did. She was working 2 jobs, I was working none. We crossed paths at the shelter where I dropped off donated coats. She helped me carry the bags up the stairs with a baby in her arms." Marina paused. Her voice didn't tremble, but it leaned closer to something real. "She never asked for anything. But I saw how she kept everyone else's needs in her hands like glass. So I wrote the letter. Told them they'd be lucky to have her." Lucas lowered his gaze. "I never knew. You weren't supposed to." They both glanced toward Avery, who was now staring at the garage window, drawing on the fogged glass with her fingertip. Marina continued. "Sometimes you give something away and forget you gave it. But someone else, they carry it for years." Lucas nodded. He felt something shift inside his chest, like an old hinge moving for the first time in too long. "She kept that letter," he said. "Filed it in a drawer we barely opened. I found it last night." Marina smiled, tired and kind. Maybe that's why it came back now. Maybe it was waiting to mean something more. A gust of wind blew past them. Marina tucked her hair behind her ear. Lucas looked at her and said gently, "Thank you." 2 words, quiet but full. Marina met his eyes. "For what?" "For waiting," he said, "even when neither of us knew we were." The shop was empty. Everyone had gone for lunch, even Franklin. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, washing the garage in a pale hum. Outside, the wind picked up, kicking leaves across the lot, but inside it was still. Lucas sat on a low stool near the back, a wrench dangling from his fingers. He didn't move, didn't work, didn't think. He just sat there. On the workbench behind him, someone had left a rag, half folded, still damp. The smell of motor oil lingered in the air, thick but familiar. The kind of smell that clings to your skin even after you shower. He looked down at his hands, calloused, stained in the creases. Strong hands that once tried to build a life, then spent years learning how to carry what was left. Lucas set the wrench on the floor. It made a soft, hollow clink. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, shoulders rounding. Still no words, but inside something shifted, not like a collapse, more like an opening. His eyes closed, not in exhaustion, but in surrender, to silence, to stillness, to the ache that had lived under his ribs for too long. No sobs came, no shaking, just breath, slow, uneven, real. There were no clocks ticking in the garage, no music playing, no one watching. And for once, Lucas didn't need to be anything, not the fixer, not the father, not the man who almost held it all together. Just a man, on a stool in a quiet room, letting the weight sit where it needed to sit. A drop of oil from the lift above him fell. Tap. Then another, like slow applause for grief that had waited its turn. Outside, the bench was empty again, but that didn't feel lonely anymore. Just quiet. Just true. The air in the garage had settled. Lucas was still seated on the same low stool. His breath had evened out. Eyes half open, not resting, not working, just there. Then came the sound, soft footfall, boots that knew the space better than any alarm system. Lucas didn't turn. He didn't have to. Franklin appeared beside him without fanfare. The old man said nothing, didn't ask, didn't prod. He just stood for a moment, then placed a small wooden box on the workbench near Lucas's elbow. No lock. No label, just worn grain and brass hinges dulled with time. Lucas looked at it. "That from your truck?" he asked, voice low. Franklin gave a one-shoulder shrug, the closest thing he had to a nod. Lucas reached out, flipped the latch. Inside, a set of delicate screwdrivers, tweezers, brushes, a magnifying lens, each piece polished, cared for, kept, clockmaker's tools. He looked up at Franklin. "You fixed watches?" "Not for money," the old man said. Lucas ran a thumb across the velvet lining. "Where'd you get this?" "My father," Franklin replied. Then after a beat, "Used to say the smaller the part, the more it matters." Lucas nodded slowly. He picked up the smallest screwdriver, so thin it looked like it could bend in a strong breeze. "Why now?" Franklin gave him a look, not sharp, not soft, just steady. "Because some things don't tick until you're ready to open them up." Then he turned without waiting for a response and walked out the same way he came. Lucas sat in silence again. But now, the silence felt different. He looked toward the wall clock at home in his mind, the one that hadn't worked in years. He imagined the sound it used to make. Tick. Pause. Tick. Not loud, but steady, a rhythm, a promise. He placed the screwdriver back into the box, closed the lid with care. Not everything could be fixed, but some things, some very small, very quiet things, deserved the attempt. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, the clock laid open in front of him like a chest wound. Screws in careful piles, gears exposed, delicate, aged. His fingers moved with a precision he hadn't trusted in a long time. Not with machines this small. Not with time itself. The box Franklin gave him sat open beside a steaming mug of coffee, the smallest screwdriver balanced between his fingers. He adjusted the gear pin, held his breath, and slid the spring arm gently into place. The mechanism clicked so faint he wasn't sure he imagined it. He watched, waited. And then, tick, tick. The second hand trembled, then began to move. Not fast, just enough. Lucas leaned back, breath caught in his chest, the kind of breath that didn't come from exertion, but from something deeper. Relief, release, re-entry. The clock was running. He stood, hung it back on the wall above the table. It ticked steadily, soft against the hush of the morning. Below it, Avery's drawing still hung. Two figures on a bench, side by side. Lucas looked at them both, then at his keys on the counter, and he knew where he had to go. The hospital lobby was quieter today. Less frantic, less clinical. The kind of quiet that felt held together by stories instead of silence. Lucas took the elevator up to the third floor. When he reached room 304, the door was cracked open. He knocked once, gently. Inside, Marina sat by the window, sketchbook in her lap, pencil moving slowly. She looked up, surprised, but not startled. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. Lucas stepped in. "I didn't either, but the clock started working again." She smiled faintly, setting the pencil aside. "That's supposed to be a metaphor?" "I'm not that clever." She nodded toward the chair across from her. He sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant hospital carts and murmured voices filtered in like a low tide. Then Lucas said, "I didn't know Rebecca helped you." "Not really. I never asked." "She didn't need you to," Marina replied. "She just did what she did." He nodded. "I spent so long blaming time, work, other people, but mostly I just stopped showing up." Marina leaned forward slightly. "But you're showing up now." Lucas looked at her. "I'm trying to be someone worth waiting for." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "You already were," she said. "Avery knew it before you did." He let that sit between them, then added, "I found the letter you wrote." Marina gave a quiet chuckle. "That old thing. It kept her going. She never told me, but it was her turning point." Marina looked down at her hands. "Funny. I wrote it because I felt helpless, and now, years later, it finds its way back when I needed help." Lucas exhaled. "I guess that's how kindness works. It doesn't rot. It waits." The room filled with something heavier than silence, something closer to stillness. Marina said, almost to herself, "I'm scared to start over." Lucas nodded. "So am I." Then added, "But maybe we don't have to start big. Maybe we just start with lunch, or a walk, or fixing a broken clock." She looked out the window. The city below moved like it always had, but inside the room something had changed. She turned back to him. "I'd like that." Lucas smiled. For real this time. Not because it fixed anything, but because finally something had begun. The rooftop was quiet, not silent but removed. Above the town, above the hallway buzz and machine breath of the hospital, it felt like standing outside time. Lucas and Marina sat side by side on a low concrete ledge, bundled in coats. The night air wasn't cruel, just honest, cold enough to keep you present. Below them, the town moved in soft yellow lights. Brake lights blinked at intersections. Neon signs flickered. A dog barked once, then stopped. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Marina asked, "What time is it?" Lucas glanced at the watch on his wrist. Old, scratched, reliable. "Almost 9. Marina looked forward again. "I never liked 9. Why?" "Feels like the day's closing in. Too late to fix anything, too early to sleep it off." Lucas nodded. "Yeah, 9's honest." A pause. Wind passed between them like a polite stranger. Marina pulled her sleeves down over her hands. "I thought I'd leave this town a long time ago," she said. Lucas turned his head toward her. "What stopped you?" She smiled faintly. "Life? Rent? One good week followed by 3 bad ones, and then Avery." Lucas tilted his chin. "She's something. She's everything." Marina replied, soft and without drama. She sat on that bench like the world owed her answers, Lucas said. She didn't get that from me, Marina replied. I usually just avoid the questions. Lucas looked down at his hands, clasped between his knees. I used to be a good listener, not with words, but I noticed things. When Rebecca was tired, she hummed. When Max couldn't sleep, he held onto his sleeve. Marina said nothing, just waited. Lucas continued. Then when things fell apart, I stopped noticing, as if not looking would mean not losing. That's not how it works, Marina said gently. No, he agreed, it's not. They sat with it. Below, a train passed. Its horn was distant but carried far in the clear night. Lucas looked up at the stars, fewer here than out in the plains, but enough. He said, Do you believe in second chances? Marina let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. I believe in tired people trying again. Lucas smiled at that, then turned to her. Can I try? With what? With showing up. Not perfect, just present. Marina looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. I think that's the only thing worth trying for, she said. Neither moved. They didn't touch, didn't promise. They just let the moment breathe. Down below, in the hallway near the elevator, Avery stood near the window. She could see them, two figures on a rooftop ledge, small in the distance. She didn't call out, didn't wave, she just smiled, softly, knowingly. Then pulled her hoodie tighter, turned, and walked back toward the waiting room. The morning started like most others. Cold air drifted through the half-open bay door of the garage. Light fell in stripes across the concrete. Coffee steamed from the chipped mug Franklin always left dangerously close to a socket box. Lucas was under the hood of a truck when he saw the boots, first scuffed, soft-soled, steady. Marina. She wore coveralls one size too big, sleeves rolled, hair tied back in a loose twist. She didn't wave, just nodded once like a mechanic would to another mechanic. Franklin stood near the bench, sorting screws by hand into shallow tins. He looked up as Marina passed, then handed her a pair of gloves without a word. She took them, fit them on slow, careful, not unsure, just respectful, of the tools, of the place, of the silence that made room for doing. The day began. No formal start, no clipboard passed around, just motion. Lucas turned back to his engine. Marina joined him at the side, wordlessly picking up the socket wrench he needed and holding it out. He took it. Didn't thank her. Didn't need to. The rhythm formed itself. Click, turn, click, release. They moved like people who weren't trying to prove anything, just trying to do something well. Franklin muttered once when a hose clamp bit his knuckle, but other than that, the room stayed quiet, not tense, not awkward, just focused. At one point, Marina lifted a tire onto the rack without struggling or calling for help. Lucas caught the motion from the corner of his eye and adjusted the jack slightly to meet her halfway. No comment, just smooth cooperation. She wiped her hands on her pants, not noticing the grease streak. Franklin tossed her a rag. She caught it one-handed. A beat passed. She grinned. So did he. Then back to work. Outside, snow had started to fall again. Light this time, like the sky was whispering. Around noon, Franklin shuffled to the back room. Lucas and Marina stood by the same truck, now nearly finished. He passed her the final bolt. She tightened it without overthinking. Lucas exhaled. Marina looked at him. You always this quiet? She asked, voice low, not breaking the atmosphere, just folding into it. Only when things are working, he replied. She gave a soft chuckle. Then we better stay quiet. They didn't smile too much, didn't lean in, but the moment settled between them like the steam off an engine-warm reel disappearing into the air without needing to be named. By the time Franklin returned, Marina had already cleaned up her section, organized the bench, and rewrapped the extension cords. He whistled once, low and approving, then passed her the clipboard with the next set of jobs. She took it like she'd always been there, and maybe in a way she had. The backyard behind the shop was nothing more than a patch of uneven grass and a few wooden crates someone once called furniture. But to Max and Avery it might as well have been a kingdom. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them dart between stacks of tires and makeshift hiding spots. Their laughter rose and fell with the wind. Avery had pulled Max into the game without instruction, just pointed at a cracked plastic bucket and said, "You guard that, it's treasure." Max didn't ask questions. He just did. Lucas hadn't seen him move like that in months. Limbs loose, unguarded, no hesitations, just running. Behind him, Marina stood with one hand in her jacket pocket. In the other, she held the yellow headphones taped carefully along the headband, foam pads refitted, one side buzzing slightly if turned too loud. She didn't wear them anymore, but she carried them, as if they'd become something more than what they played, a reminder, a marker. She watched the kids weave between each other. Max called out something unintelligible. Avery responded by leaping from a crate with theatrical flair. Both of them hit the ground laughing. Marina smiled. Then, almost without realizing, she squeezed the headphones gently in her palm. The tape held. Even where it had frayed, it held. Lucas turned slightly toward her. "She dragged me out here," he said. Marina gave a soft smile. "She drags people to the right places. She do that for you too?" Marina's eyes stayed on the children. "She stayed still so long I forgot how fast she could move." Lucas didn't answer, just watched Avery chase Max with a stick pretending to be a sword. "She didn't ask who he was," Marina said. "No, she just ran." "That's how she forgives," Lucas said. Marina nodded. "Maybe that's how we all should." The wind blew gently. Avery lost her balance and fell into Max, who laughed too hard to help her up. Neither of them minded. Marina's grip loosened on the headphones. She tucked them into her coat pocket. "They're going to be all right," she said, not to Lucas, not even to herself, just out loud like a prayer that had already come true. Lucas looked at her. "So are we," he said. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. They both turned back to the backyard, where what was broken was being used again, where what was quiet now echoed with laughter, and where forgiveness wasn't said, but played out in running feet and unfiltered joy. The garage had emptied for the day. A thin layer of dust floated in the golden light from the back window, softening every edge. Tools hung in their usual places. The bench had been wiped down. Even the old coffee mug had been rinsed. Lucas sat alone at the small office desk, not the kind that faced customers, just a nook in the corner with a wobbly lamp and a drawer that never quite shut. In front of him, a sheet of paper, blank, crisp, almost too white. He stared at it for a while, then picked up a pen. He didn't know why the idea had come, only that he couldn't stop thinking about it since Max had asked him a day ago, "Did you ever get the job, Dad?" And he hadn't answered. Not really, because it wasn't about a job anymore. Lucas lowered the pen, began to write, not in bullet points, not in bold fonts, just lines, simple, honest. Name, Lucas Boyd. Occupation, someone who left, then came back. Skills, listening again, lifting without dropping, fixing what didn't seem fixable. Experience, one marriage, one child, one mistake too many. Strength, showing up, sitting still, starting small. References. A woman who sat quietly while I spoke too little. A girl who waited without knowing why. A boy who forgave me with a sandwich in silence. He paused, then wrote the last line. Reason for applying. To say thank you for not locking the door when I walked away. for leaving the porch light on, for holding a place open until I could hold it myself. He signed it. No flourish, just a name. Then stood, walked to the wall near the back where the wooden clock ticked, now steady, soft. Below it, Avery's crayon drawing still clung with aging tape. Lucas looked at both for a long time, then took a single pushpin from the drawer, pressed the page into the wall beside them. It didn't look official, but it didn't need to. The tick of the clock continued. He stepped back, read it once more, then without a word turned off the desk lamp and left it there, not for others to approve, but for himself to remember. That the past wasn't erased, it was still there. But so was the man who'd chosen to return. The afternoon sun filtered through the high windows of the garage, casting long streaks of amber light across the floor. Everything was quiet. The tools were back in their place. The trucks parked in a neat line outside. The shop smelled faintly of grease and lemon soap. At the far end of the room, nestled into the corner by the old vending machine, Avery sat cross-legged on a folded blanket, her nose buried deep in a paperback mystery novel. The book looked well-loved, its cover faded. The spine bowed like a well-walked road. She didn't notice Lucas approach, not until he crouched beside her and held something out. The yellow headphones, repaired, taped neatly, gently cleaned, the foam pads now soft again. Avery blinked, then smiled in surprise. "You fixed them?" Lucas shook his head softly. "No." He gently slid the headphones over her ears. "They're still broken in some places." She tapped the side. "I don't hear anything." Lucas sat back, rested his arms on his knees. "That's all right." Avery looked at him, puzzled. "No music?" He shook his head again. "No music." "Then what's the point?" Lucas met her eyes. His voice was calm, grounded. "Sometimes the best sound is when we choose to really listen." Avery looked down for a second, as if trying to understand whether that was just an adult being poetic or something more. Then slowly she closed her book and didn't take off the headphones. She simply leaned her head gently against the side of the vending machine, her legs still crossed, her hands resting on the cover of her book. Lucas didn't move either. He sat on the floor beside her, just close enough to feel her presence, not close enough to intrude. Outside, a truck passed. The leaves rustled. Inside, the silence was not empty. It was shared. A kind of quiet that only exists when people stop performing, when no one needs to prove they're okay, when all the broken things between them are no longer shameful, just true. Avery turned to him after a long while. "Do you miss her?" Lucas didn't ask who. He just nodded. "Yes." Avery looked ahead. "I think she would have liked the clock." Lucas smiled. "She liked small things that kept going." Avery adjusted the headphones over her ears, even though they still didn't play a sound. Lucas whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Now we do too."